Well, that goes back into the early 2000s, 2006, when I started my job as a head coach of Hoffenheim. At the time, we did an analysis worldwide how football will look like in the future and how it even looked like at the time. And we found out that all over the planet, the biggest chance to score a goal is within 10 seconds after you have won the ball yourself with your team. And this is independent from the level of football, from the level of leagues. So within 10 seconds, the biggest chance to score is if you score within the first 10 seconds after you have won the ball. And on the other hand, we also found out that the biggest chance to win the ball back is within 8 seconds after you have lost the ball. So those two results of our worldwide analysis made us think what makes sense, what kind of football makes sense for the future for us in Hoffenheim, and later on when I started to work for Red Bull in 2011 for the two clubs in Salzburg and Leipzig. And we then decided to build and create a so-called countdown clock. We had that built because normally that kind of clock didn't exist. And we used that in training. And I remember in 2007, after a training session, when we did that, and we were just standing together, my assistant coach Peter Zeidler, myself, and my friend and mentor Helmut Groß. And after that training session, one of my players, Sead Salihovic, passed by the three of us and said, "Who invented that kind of exercise today? Helmut, was that you?" And Helmut Groß would say, "Why?" "Well, it gets on our nerves." And I said, "This is exactly what it should do." But he meant it obviously in a different way than we meant it. But yeah, in fact, modern football training is exactly that. It's a cognitive exercise, cognitive training. We called them the so-called provocational rules. The rules in training sessions develop the game into a higher standard level, so that on Saturday when the players play their game, their game in their league or wherever, it feels easier than the training session. No? So this is what we did, and that brought us back to the countdown clock. Yeah, that's how we started. I mean, coming back to those two things that we found out, if you know that the biggest chance to score a goal is within 10 seconds, and after the 10 seconds it drastically decreases the chance, then what does that tell you? You don't even need to be a football person. If you only have 10 seconds, you have to hurry up and not waste time and not play the ball square back to the goalkeeper, then the 10 seconds are over. So if you want to score within 10 seconds, you have to hurry up and play vertical football. The other thing is that the biggest chance to win the ball back within 8 seconds means counter press. All the players, after you have lost the ball, should try to win the ball back within 8 seconds, and this will happen much more likely if all the players participate, if they act like a swarm or a school of fish or whatever, if they work together. As soon as 2 or 3 players think, let me know when we have the ball again, I'm out of this, maybe you try to win the ball back with 7 players. This is very difficult, almost impossible. The higher you go, the more unlikely this is. And if you look at the current Champions League, for me PSG was almost perfect in that. Bayern Munich made a big step with Vincent Kompany as their coach this season. If you compare this season with the season before, there was a big difference. And I think all the top clubs in Europe play that kind of football. In Spain, it was Barcelona with Hansi Flick. Even the national team is being influenced. I don't know who influenced whom, but even if you look at the Spanish national team, it looks completely different to the way they played 3-4 years ago. To be honest, no. What I know is that they sign players at a very young age and develop them in the style that Barcelona wants to play. Technical football, a very skillful approach. But in detail, I don't know what they're doing there, to be honest. But obviously they do a lot of things right. I mean, even if you look at the current Barcelona team, they play with, I don't know, 8-9 homegrown players. The Spanish national team, when they played in the final against Portugal, they played with 9 players who could still play for the under-21s now in the European Cup. 9 out of the first 11 could play for the under-21s. Amazing. I mean, if I now look back at the time, it came as a big surprise when Dietmar Hopp called me in 2006. That was after my first spell with Schalke. Hoffenheim was and still is a little village with a population of 3,000. And when he called me, if I could meet with him and if I could imagine to coach Hoffenheim and develop them into a first division club, I said, well, I don't know. We met, and in the end I said, yes, I will do it. And within 2 years we won 2 consecutive promotions and won the winter title. We were ahead of Bayern Munich after the first year. And the interesting part of it was, after we had won the second promotion, we only signed 1 new player, Andy Beck. So we played with the second division team and won the winter title. In the end we finished 6th or 7th because we had Ibisevic injured with a anterior ligament injury. But and then the same happened again with Salzburg and Leipzig. We did a similar thing there when we won 3 promotions in 4 years. If I now look back, the things that we did there in both clubs, or in the 3 clubs, of course it was a lot easier to do it with clubs who had no big footballing tradition, you know. There was nobody in Hoffenheim, there were no former internationals. In Leipzig there were no former internationals. Even in Salzburg, not that many. So there was nobody there who could tell us, why do they do those crazy things? We didn't do that. Why do they do it now? This is what happens in most of the big traditional clubs. So it was easier for us to find and walk on new pathways, you know. We were also doing some things that we were just giving it a trial and error, and said, well, in the end, the idea was, if we want to develop football teams, and by football teams development, develop individual players, what kind of issues, if you compare that with a jigsaw, with a puzzle, and the jigsaw consists of 250 or 500 pieces, we wanted to offer our players all 500 pieces, and not say, well, no, we don't need this, we didn't need that 20 years ago, so why do we need it now? We wanted to have that in our portfolio, and the players could decide if they want to make use of this one or that one, you know. So I think in hindsight it was easier for us to do it in clubs who were more or less startups. We were footballing startups, and we didn't need to take into consideration if we should do that, or if we could earn some criticism for doing this or that. It was easier to do it in clubs like Hoffenheim, Leipzig and Salzburg. And of course we were trying to bring in people, new people, best men or women for each job. We had a clear-cut idea of how we want to play. And this is how we did it. I mean, we have a similar situation now with our national team in Austria. If we want to beat Italy or Germany or Croatia or the Netherlands, who individually have probably better players than we have, we need to make up for that by having a better match plan, a better mentality, a better team spirit. So you need to be better in other areas of the football game. That was 4 years ago. When was that? 4 or 5 years ago?
Back to 21.
4 years ago. Yeah, at the time I had a phone call from Rafael Juste, whom I didn't know at the time. He introduced himself and asked me if we could meet in Barcelona. I said, yes, we can, but for what? And we are looking for a new mastermind, a new sporting director whatsoever. So I flew into Barcelona, I met Rafa Juste, I met the president, Laporta, and we spoke for 2 days. We met and spoke for 2 days, and obviously we spoke about similar things that we are talking about right now, what we did in Hoffenheim, Leipzig, Salzburg, and he said, yeah, that sounds very interesting. And what kind of coaches would you need for that? And I said, well, we need modern coaches who like to work with young players, who can develop those young players, who can deal with this with good leadership skills, who also look after the players and trust and believe into those young players. I mean, if you play with almost only young players like Barcelona does, you need to trust and believe into those players. You need to let them run and play like little young wolves or dogs. Yeah? If you just tell them, don't do that and don't take too many risks. If you want to play with young players, you have to take some risks and let them play. And obviously I also mentioned Hansi Flick's name, and maybe also one or two other coaches. Jürgen Klopp probably I also mentioned. And obviously he just remembered that comment that I made at the time. Interesting. When I was a young boy, when I was 14 or 15 and played for one of my home clubs, I was the captain of the team. And at the time, that was back in 73, so some time ago, 50 years ago, football players played with numbers 1 to 11. So number 12 was the first player on the bench, you know. And I asked my coach at the time if I could play with number 14. And he said, why? Yeah, I want to play with 14 because Johan Cruyff played with 14 and he allowed me to play with 14. So I was the only player in my team who was allowed to play with 14. And obviously he was, for me, the first modern, highly intelligent number 10. In Germany, we had a player like Günther Netzer, who was a similar kind of, well, not similar kind of player. Johan Cruyff was faster, he was more athletic, more physical than Günther Netzer. But for me, he was the first modern number 10 playmaker. Not only playing with the ball, like Netzer or even Overath, he was also able to work and play his part when the other team was in possession. And obviously for me, it was also obvious that after his player's career, he would probably play a vital role in a club, either as a head coach or as a sporting director. And he was both. His influence on clubs like Ajax and Barcelona was massive. And what I think the biggest achievement of Johan Cruyff after his playing career was that both clubs, Ajax and Barcelona, for a long time had that, so what I call corporate identity. What kind of football do they want to play? And whenever they changed coaches, the new coach had to be able to follow the same approach. And they always, at the time, for 15, 20 years, they signed similar kind of players, developed players from their own youth ranks. And they never brought in a wrong coach. And that was, for me, one of the biggest achievements of Johan Cruyff, because he knew it doesn't make sense with every change of coaches to change your footballing approach and your style of football. Unfortunately, there are not that many Johan Cruyffs currently in clubs, and if you look into clubs like England, for example, what happened at Chelsea after Thomas Tuchel left, what happened at Manchester after Sir Alex left, what happened, look into the German second division, how many former first division big clubs are playing in the second division in Germany. Why? Exactly for that reason. They all have leadership problems. Coaches in Spain, they have a big tradition. Even Udo Lattek, Jupp Heynckes, just to name the two of them, they were successful coaches in Spain. And therefore it's not that much of a surprise that German coaches are being successful. With Hansi, I think, without speaking Catalan and Spanish, I don't think that he speaks Spanish. He only speaks English with the players, I suppose. It looks as if the players love him, they like him, they follow him. And if you achieve that in a foreign country without speaking a single word of the language, I think that's a good achievement, big achievement. Man, of course, discipline is one thing that you normally bring as a German coach, to be on time, not mañana, but today. So, but I think the biggest achievement for him, Hansi again, is the style. He changed the complete approach, high line defending, high press, counter press. I've never seen Barcelona play like that for a very long time. So this is completely different. He trusts and believes into those top young players that he's playing with. Average age, I don't know, 23 probably. With a younger goalkeeper, they would have been even younger than 23. And yes, and he, as I said, he trusts and believes. I think for most of the players, he's like a father figure.
Yes.
And yeah, I think he ticks quite a few boxes that are relevant for a modern coach. Yeah. Similar to Jurgen Klopp, probably also similar to my role as a coach. I always tend to say a modern football manager coach is a service provider, and a service provider for the players. I have to help them to become the best version of themselves. This is and in a team sport, it can only happen if you also develop the team. And if you're not successful as a team, the German national team in the last 2 World Cups, nobody was a winner. They were all losers at the end because they didn't achieve and their goals. And so if you want to be successful in a team sport, you have to develop the team. And if you do that, then individual players can also benefit from it.
Yeah, Barcelona is the youngest teams squads.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah. And Paris.
what does it mean for you?
If I was the owner or the sporting director of a club, I would only try to sign and invest into young players. Because no matter how you look at it, it only makes sense. Does it make sense to spend a transfer fee of 30, 40, 50 million for a 30-year-old? Not really. If you let's make that kind of calculation. You sign a 28, 30-year-old, give him a 5-year contract, you spend 50 million transfer fee plus on average 15 million euros per year times 5 is 65 is 110, 120 million plus agent fees. The whole deal costs you round about 150 million. For what? You will never get that money back. If you are unlucky, in the last year the player does not even play anymore, in the last 1 or 2 years. So the only thing you do, if you do that, you invest into the possibly greater amount of success in the first 3 or 4 years. This is like a bet. You might as well go into a casino and say, I put 150 million on red or white. I know I'm exaggerating a little bit, but you know what I mean. If I was the owner of a club, I would never allow to do that, to make that happen. Okay, Harry Kane, Bayern did that with Harry Kane. Yes, he scored a lot of goals. He had good influence on the atmosphere in the locker room. Yes, they won the German title. This is something you should do as a club like Bayern Munich. But apart from that, they didn't win the cup. They didn't win the Champions League. We have to wait and see what will happen in the next 3 or 4 years. I'm not saying that this was not a good transfer, but my approach would be a different one. You have to sign a Harry Kane when he was 18 or 20, and then keep him as long as you can. This would be my approach, but again, every club has to decide themselves. I would much rather have a club like the squad of Barcelona and Paris. I have all the imagination in the world and the fantasy in the world. What could happen with if I see Barcelona, Paris Saint-Germain in the next 2-3 years, if they can keep their squad together,
Yeah.
I don't see any team who could possibly beat them in the next years. Yeah, I think probably it will the same will happen that already happened in the last 10-15 years. I mean, if you watch football games in the late 1990s, 1995, 1998, and I always have the impression, please press on normal speed. It looks like slow motion when you're watching games 20-25 years ago. It looks like a different ball game. The influence of that transitional football that Jurgen Klopp and myself, Jurgen Klopp with Dortmund, myself with Hoffenheim, that we influenced in Germany, developed football into a different ball game with much more speed, much more intensity, a high speed team sport, and therefore the mere game takes place on a pitch 20 times 15 meters, you know. This is where the actual game is taking place. And I think this will go on like that. The top teams will still try to find the right solutions, to make the right decisions in a limited space and in a limited amount of time. And this is cognition. You have to train your players to find and take the right decisions in limited time and space, I think. I mean, this is every century you have a player like that. I mean, a 17-year-old that mature. Of course, if you look into his face, you still see that he's only 17. But if you see him play, this is like from a different planet, you would say. For me, amazing player.
You enjoy with him?
I don't know him in person, but if you see him play, I enjoy. I think every coach wants a player like this in his team. And the big difference to other top stars, former top stars, is that he's also working hard against the ball. He's chasing backwards. I'm pretty sure if the coach tells him you have to do this and that, he does that. He's not kind of a diva or a player who thinks no, I don't want to do that. The mere fact that Paris Saint-Germain won the Champions League for the very first time, they've been trying for 10, 15 years, spending a lot of money, and now the top stars are all gone. No Kylian Mbappé, no Messi, no Neymar, and all of a sudden they win the Champions League. Coincidence? No. It happened because of that. And if you look at what's his name? The George, what a player. I mean, what did you see what happened after? In the last 10 minutes, they were leading 4-0, and he was sprinting 60 yards backwards, full sprint, taking with a tackle, winning the ball. You would have never seen that from Neymar, even Mbappé, Messi. I'm not sure. And this is, they are a team now. They are, I mean, when he came to Leverkusen, they were 17th or even 18th, bottom of the league or last from bottom. He kept them in the league. I think they finished 5th or 6th in the first year, and then in his second year they won the league. And of course they brought in some interesting new players, but they didn't spend that much of money in order to build his new squad. He just developed those kind of players, and he's a typical example how important the role of a head coach is. Together with their scouting department, together with Rolfes as a sporting director, who is not taking his ego rating his ego too highly. What they achieved is amazing. From bottom to top, winning the league, changing sometimes from back 3 to back 4, depending on the opponent. In the year when they won the league, in almost every game, maybe apart from Atalanta in the final, but in all those other games, he outcoached other teams. In the second year, at times, it didn't work that well, but in his first year, it was amazing what he did as a young coach. He was still inexperienced as a coach. So for me, a top guy. I think obviously the players will always also tell you that they like him as a person. And with Real, I think they need to change a few things. That they need some younger players. They need to rebuild their squad, and therefore it will be interesting to see what happens there.